Professor Yusef Waghid is a professor of philosophy of education, in the Department of Education of Policy Studies. And he was Dean of the Faculty of Education at Stellenbosch University. If anybody's wondering where Stellenbosch is in South Africa. He holds a doctorate in the areas of philosophy of education, education policy studies, and philosophy. He holds the doctorates in the area of philosophy of education, education policy studies, and philosophy. He is an elected member or fellow of the Academy of Science of South Africa, executive member of the International Network of Philosophers of Education, B-rated NRF researcher with internationally acclaimed status, and editor-in-chief of South African Journal of Higher Education. Among his books are Education, Democracy, and Citizenship Reconsidered, Pedagogical Encounters, published by Some Media Press, Stellenbosch, 2010. There's a book on Conceptions of Islamic Education, Pedagogical Framings, published by Peter Lang, New York, 2011. African Philosophy of Education Reconsidered, On Being Human, published by Routledge, London, 2013. And with Nuran Davids, Citizenship, Education, and Violence in Schools. Astaghfirullah. Nowadays, violence in schools. On Disrupted Potentialities and Becoming, published by Sense Publishers, Rotterdam and Taipei. That is a 2014 publication. And as a sectional editor for philosophy of education in the volume edited by Bridges, Berbels, Griffiths, and Smeyers. The International Handbook on Interpretation of Educational Research, Philosophy of Education Genre, published by Springer, Dordrecht, 2014. In 2011, he was honored with the prestigious National Research Foundation, NRF Special Recognition Award, for Champion of Research Capacity Development at Higher Education Institutions in South Africa, as recognition for his influence and significant contribution towards the transformation of the social science community in South Africa. We are privileged because Professor Yusef Waghid is a distinguished professor of philosophy of education at Stellenbosch University. And without further ado, there are many more books here. In 2014, 2016, that were just like yesterday being printed. There's so many, very illustrious. I would like to call upon Professor Yusef Waghid to deliver his talk on Towards Educational and Civilizational Revival.
عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار. صدق الله العظيم. Esteemed guests, respected and dignified ulama, Professor Dr. Zaini Uthman from Cassis, UTM, Sheikh Abdul Karim, shukran for the invitation to share some of my thoughts with you on educational and civilizational renewal. I have commenced with ayat from the Holy Quran because I am conscious that in those few verses of the Holy Quran which I introduced this morning lies what I would term the post-enlightenment ideas of education and civilization. And you have noticed my selection of the concept post-enlightenment because I'm immediately positioning myself as a person who somehow parts from the phenomenal contribution made by continental philosophers, in particular Immanuel Kant. And I want to develop a particular understanding which is already in existence but probably not in articulation. And then I want to make the argument for what should encompass educational and civilizational renewal. So let me tell you two things first. First, about myself. Being invited to Malaysia, this is already my 12th time to this wonderful country since 20 years ago. What is my affinity to this part of the world? I was born in Cape Town from a Muslim family. Where did the Muslim family come from? My ancestors are from the Indonesian archipelago, from the North, India, and I was born in South Africa as part of the indigenous community there. 350 years ago, my ancestors arrived at the Cape, but their arrival at the Cape were under dubious circumstances. Meaning, my ancestors were excommunicated from the archipelago controlled by the Dutch East India Company and excommunicated and banned to the Cape. Now that is a very interesting history because what it brings to mind is that like many parts of the African continent, South Africa has also been colonized by the Dutch and by the British. But we had a remarkable scholar who was exiled on the island called Robben Island. And those of you who know a little bit of South African history, it is the same island on which our beloved past President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was imprisoned for 28 years. Just because he opposed in person and in being the racist regime in South Africa at the time. So I come from a country that has been colonized and a country that has been subjected to apartheid prosecution. But I also come from a country that has been democratized. So out of the 55 million people that currently reside in our country, only 1 million are Muslim. And that's quite remarkable considering the Muslim influence in our government and in our societal affairs, and considering that we have moved from a state of persecution and torture to one of emancipation and democratic freedom, which is a unique history. And this is the country where I come from. I have started with a critique of Kant. And I am not discounting Immanuel Kant's phenomenal contribution to the theory of rationality, what it means to use the human mind, and how the human mind is nurtured through human experience. Who would want to dare to criticize Kant? Who would want to dare to critique one of the most prominent philosophers in Western history? The entire Western civilization is based on the eminent theories of Immanuel Kant. So the question arises, who dares to take issue with Kant? We all know about Western modernity and Western civilization, and even how Western civilization has flourished. Yet, I want to take issue with Kant. So let me preface my critique of Kant with what has transpired over the previous century. Over the last century, we actually had the first mass atomic bomb dropped on the island of Hiroshima, maiming and killing thousands of people. Yet it was an act which was inspired by the most sophisticated engineering, the most sophisticated ideas of technology, and yet used against humanity, human beings. The second major crime that we saw in the previous century against humanity was Auschwitz. It is recognized as the prison camps, the concentration camps of Auschwitz. Yet, inspired by a people amongst whom Immanuel Kant was born. We all know what has become known as the Jewish Holocaust. And not too long ago, we had to witness how thousands of human beings had to be shipped all over the world to be shipped as slaves because of colonial imperialism. Yet, it was at a time where the thoughts of Kant were at its zenith. So I give you 3 instances where humanity has been subjected to the most severe challenges in the world that the world has ever seen. Yet, it happened at a time where Immanuel Kant's continental philosophy of human reason within the context of human experience were at its highest, at its zenith. So something was wrong with the practice of that philosophy. And I do not think that sufficient attention has been given as to what went wrong in the world. Because if we want to think about educational and civilizational renewal in the modern age, we have to look at the lessons of the past. So what went wrong in the world? What confronted us at a time where human reason was considered as the impetus of rationality, as the core function of rationality? And for Kant, just to elaborate, if you want to reason, you have to give a human justification, human evidence for your reasoning. And yet we saw that the world was in chaos. I do not want to mention the fourth revolution of chaos, which is currently happening in the world today. But perhaps I can just say that to my mind, migrancy is a testimony of a fourth predicament that has faced, which humankind is currently being faced with. The migrancy of thousands of people from their homelands to countries where they do not want to be. Yet, at a time also where human reason and human experience have been classified as the most phenomenal contributions human beings could ever have aspired to attain. So what went wrong? What went wrong? When I introduced the presentation with the Ulul Albab, and the ones who الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهِ, the ones who engage in dhikr, قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ, and then وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Tafakkur, the concept of dhikr and the concept of tafakkur in the Quran, in the glorious, illustrious Quran, is being used in an intertwined way. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not speak through His eminence about dhikr without tafakkur. And neither does Allah speak about tafakkur without dhikr. The two are intertwined. And where does that particular concept take issue or disagree with the Kantian philosophy of human reason and human experience? Because human reasoning can never devoid of human intuition, what a person feels and experiences innately within his being, within his body. So one who embarks upon dhikr, simplistically put, is one who feels the emotions of what can be engendered. But one who performs tafakkur is one who puts his emotions in actions in order that his human reasons, his intellect, His contemplation is never devoid of his inner feelings of love and humanity. So yet you can destroy human beings on the basis of your knowledge, of your reasons, of your justifications, because that's why you dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. That's why you perform the most outrageous Auschwitz tortures. That's why the world could witness colonialism and slavery, because you divorced your human use of reason from the human internalization of emotion. You have no feeling for humanity. How can you have any feeling for humanity if you destroy human beings? How can you have any feeling for humanity if you witness migrancy and yet you do nothing?
Thank you. Say it all, and I will choose.
So what I'm saying, unless human emotion is coupled with the exercise of human intellect, human contemplation, many things will go and have gone wrong. And this brings me to one particular claim I want to make, which forms the basis of our education and our educational revival. We have to move beyond Kant. It is not Kant who was responsible for the murders and the tortures and the enslavement. It was an interpretation of Kantian philosophy which resulted in a misconstrued understanding of what human action actually means. And one has to understand this. And unless you can remedy that, and for me the remedy lies in the non-bifurcation between human emotion and human reason. If you do not have feelings for one another as human beings, your exercise of reasoning will mean very little. Equally said, if the pursuit of human reason is not accomplished by the emotions of humans, if I cannot feel the vulnerabilities and understand the vulnerabilities of people against whom I should and for act, if I see an injustice and who I should support in pursuit of adl or justice, then I cannot enact my capacity as a human being. And this is the reason why humans are in opposition on this earth. Because they do not use their faculties of intuition and emotion combined with the faculties of rationality and intellectual exertion. So it is not that I take issue with Kant for the sake of dismissing Kant, but I think an overwhelming emphasis in the Western world in particular has been placed on Kant at the expense of human emotion. You cannot be a human being in the first place if you deny yourself from the capacity both to have feelings and emotions and equally to have a sense of reason, of aql. So when Allah says in the Holy Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati wa raditu lakum al-Islam dina, is because the perfection of your deen can only happen as a consequence of your exercise of human emotion and human reason. Those are the qualities that constitute being human. And the perfection of your deen is how you enact your qualities of a human being. The question arises, why is it so significant for humans, first of all, to understand and realize that they have to pursue an intertwined idea of human emotion and human reason, and not in a skewed way, in an overwhelmingly Kantian way, just focusing on human reason and intellect and experience. Why? Because those qualities of human reason and human emotion gives you what we call in English dignity. It gives you human dignity because then you can act civilly, decently, in the interest of humanity. But if you act undignifiedly, it is because of a lack of applying any one of those faculties which Allah Almighty has granted you and instilled in you. This brings me to my second argument and my second point. How wonderful for humans to know that they have been blessed with emotion and reason. And how wonderful for us to know that if human reason and emotion is the first principle of what it means to be an educated being, then where does this education lead you to? So education begins with the autonomous self. The autonomous self, the human person. But where does this lead you to? Can I function in a world, in a society, when I remain in isolation? Where I only communicate with myself? Even communicating with myself is a denial that others exist. So we are together with one another, but not as an aggregation only. Meaning that we are on one continent or we are on several continents and you can count us and you can locate us. You can say where we are. So we are Americans, we are Canadians, we are British, we are Africans, we are Arabs, we are Chinese, we are Australasians. But we are not only in aggregation. Because in aggregation means that you can count us and you can situate us. You can put us somewhere. But humans are not imprisoned as an aggregated populace. Humans are free because they are part of an association. And what makes humans an association? Does Allah not remind us in the illustrious Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Uda'u ila sabili rabbik bil hikmah wal maw'izatil hasana wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan. Does Allah not remind us that we are not in isolation, but we are actually existent in an association, Because where in an association, where in an aggregation can we function without summoning one another? With dua, without inviting one another to the path of Allah. Where can we do that? We can only do that as humans. Because here we are commanded to engage with one another in an encounter. In most of the Anglo-Saxon literature today, what we read about education is couched in the word encounter. Allah says in the Holy Quran that we are part of I have created you in tribes and nations in order that you might know one another. لِتَعَارَفُوا. We are in a ta'aruf, in an association where we recognize one another for who we are. And when we recognize one another for who we are, then we listen to one another. We do not only impose our views on one another because we think we are right. We impose our views on the basis of justifying why we are right. And equally, we listen to others' criticisms of us. And it is that which brings us in ta'aruf, so that we might encounter one another and know one another with our pluralities and our differences and our commonalities, which is the basis of education, which is at the heart of a human encounter. How would human beings ever engage and interact with one another if they do not engage in ta'aruf, in an encounter that is framed by the reasons and by the emotions and by the justifications of their points of view? Often, Muslims are unfairly criticized. For what? Muslims are criticized for not having the capacity to engage in deliberation. Really? Where the Quran inspires Muslims to deliberate, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ وَشَاوِلْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. How can we be criticized for not being a people who are engaging with one another, who are listening to the views of one another, and who look for justifications, but we also look for criticisms in order that we might think differently about the points we encounter or experience tomorrow? So we are a people of shura. We are a people of deliberative inquiry. We are a people of deliberative engagement. So the criticisms that Muslims do not possess these qualities, those criticisms must be unfounded. Because if their primary source, Al-Quran, commands them to engage in a form of deliberative inquiry, how is it then possible that we can be criticized, critiqued, for not having the capacity to engage in deliberative inquiry? It's a myth. It's a myth that our Islam is not associated with deliberation. It's a myth that doesn't exist. It's an unfair criticism that has no ground. It's a myth. At the heart of our form of living is the art of deliberation and persuasion and argumentation. That is who we are. We possess those qualities on the basis of having inspired by the glorious Quran. Alhamdulillah. So the second argument I made was an argument for education as a form of deliberative engagement. And just to take you back, the first argument was for education as a form of human emotion and reason. But human emotion and reason will have to manifest in our cultivation of our human relations. And that is what would be principal drivers for what is to come. I pay tribute for my third point to the esteemed scholar, Professor Sayyid Muhammad Naguib Al-Attas from this area, who is now already in his 90s and still writing books, alhamdulillah. And his semantic analysis of the word Medina, city, and how he showed how the idea of a human civilization, tamaddun, emanates from the root where Medina emanates from. But as we know, the prophetic city was a city of laws and regulations. And it was a city that was glued together by order and systems. Now, if a single city could have functioned during the Medinite period in such a profound way, the lesson for any human civilization ought to be one that is orderly, that is dignified, and that functions in a way that embraces humanity, emotion, reason, and difference, and our collectiveness. That is a civilization. Because you cannot have a civilization if it's not underscored and shaped and guided by systems of order, regulation. You cannot do what you want to do. Otherwise, you will have catastrophe and violence and trauma in the world. Someone must hold you accountable. You are answerable to the very idea of tamaddun, civilization. You cannot embark on anything and everything that you want to do which is not guided by system, by organization, by congruence. Because otherwise you will have trauma, torture, mismanagement, corruption, you name it. And this is the renewal of a civilization that a Muslim ummah has the capacity to engender, because they have been instilled with the qualities to enhance and expand that kind of civilization. It is this kind of civilization which should be underscored by the value of education, because the two are actually intertwined. You cannot have a civilization that is prosperous, that is forward-looking, that is imaginative, without a civilization that is intent on making education its basis. Because education allows you to act in a dignified way. Education allows you to deliberate, and education allows you to agree and disagree in a space of mutual harmony. You cannot only have dissonance, you also have to have congruence. You cannot only have disagreement, you also have to have agreement. And this is the kind of civilization that we aspire to attain. And when I heard in conclusion, Sheikh Karim mentioned to us how important it is for a Muslim ummah to be contributors and leaders of such a civilization, then I saw the possibility. Because there's always the possibility within us to pursue a kind of civilization in communion, in association with one another. Shukran, jazakumullahu khair, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.